Silver City, New Mexico Territory, March 1891. Heinrich Müller, a German immigrant with a university education in classical architecture, began excavating into the southeastern slope of Pinos Altos Ridge, and every rancher within 20 miles thought he'd lost his mind. While his neighbors raised timber frame houses and barns across the high desert grasslands, Heinrich dug. He hauled out wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow of red clay soil, carving a dwelling straight into the earth like the ancient Puebloans, whose ruins dotted the mesas 30 miles north. Samuel Patterson, who owned the largest cattle operation in Grant County, rode up on his bay gelding one April afternoon, watched Heinrich shovel dirt for 10 minutes, then shook his head. "Muller, you're building a damn tomb, not a home," Patterson said, spitting tobacco into the dirt. "That hillside's gonna come down on your head first heavy rain." Jack Morrison, the settlement's most experienced carpenter who'd built 17 houses in Silver City alone, was even more direct. "You're wasting time and muscle on a hole in the ground when you could frame a proper house in 3 weeks," Morrison told him at the general store. "Wood's meant for building. Dirt's meant for burying." Even Father Miguel Santos, the Catholic priest who'd ministered in the Southwest for 23 years, expressed concern after Sunday Mass. "Heinrich, I've seen mining tunnels collapse and kill good men. Living underground tempts disaster. God gave us timber and nails for a reason." But Heinrich kept digging, his silence more eloquent than any argument. What did this German immigrant understand about southwestern construction that men who'd lived here their entire lives had completely missed? Before we reveal exactly what Heinrich built into that hillside and why it would save his life, while his critics lost everything, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now let's dig into what might be the most misunderstood building innovation in frontier history. Heinrich's design violated every convention of 1891 New Mexico construction. Instead of raising walls above ground, he excavated backward into the slope, creating a rectangular chamber measuring 24 feet wide, 32 feet deep, and 9 feet high. The ceiling remained 8 feet underground at the front entrance, increasing to 12 feet of earth coverage at the rear wall. He left the southern face open for a conventional stone facade with 2 windows and a heavy timber door, but 3 walls and the entire roof consisted of packed earth held by timber supports and a waterproof layer of clay mixed with straw and animal blood, a technique he'd read about in studies of Mesopotamian construction. Patterson visited the site in May and couldn't contain his disgust. "You've got 8,000 pounds of dirt sitting over your head on pine beams," he said, pointing at the roof supports. "First hard rain saturates that soil. It's coming through your ceiling. You'll be sleeping in mud." Morrison examined the timber framework and shook his head. "You're using twice the lumber I'd need for a proper house, and you're hiding it all underground where it'll rot from moisture. That's lumber that could frame walls, not prop up a cave." The criticism intensified when Heinrich began installing his ventilation system, 2 clay pipes running from the rear of the structure to the surface, each pipe 8 inches in diameter and angled to create airflow without allowing rain entry. "Pipes to breathe underground like some kind of prairie dog," laughed Thomas Garrett, who operated the town's sawmill. "Next, you'll be storing nuts for winter." By June, Heinrich had completed the structure and moved in with his wife Anna and their 2 children, Klaus and Greta. The interior walls were plastered smooth with lime and clay. The southern stone facade, 3 feet thick, contained a massive fireplace that required remarkably little fuel. The floor, stamped earth covered with wooden planks, remained level and dry. But the community's skepticism didn't waver. Margaret Patterson, Samuel's wife, visited Anna in July and later reported to the ladies' sewing circle, "It's like visiting a cellar, dark and close, even with the windows. I couldn't live like a root vegetable." The practical objections seemed legitimate. Water infiltration worried everyone. Jack Morrison predicted the timber supports would rot within 5 years from constant underground moisture. Father Santos worried about ventilation and the risk of suffocation from bad air. These weren't ignorant complaints from backward skeptics. These were experienced frontier settlers who'd survived 20 New Mexico summers and winters, who understood construction in an unforgiving environment where mistakes killed families. Their concerns came from hard-won knowledge. What they didn't understand was thermal mass, And what they'd never considered was fire. What Heinrich understood, and what his critics had never considered, was the heat capacity of Earth itself. Soil stores thermal energy at a rate of approximately 0.3 BTU per pound per degree Fahrenheit. The 8,000 pounds of earth above Heinrich's roof, plus the 3 walls of packed earth surrounding his living space, created a thermal mass battery weighing approximately 42,000 pounds. During New Mexico's blazing summer days, when surface temperatures reached 105 degrees Fahrenheit, that earth mass absorbed heat slowly, its temperature rising just 2 or 3 degrees, while the air outside climbed 30 degrees from morning to afternoon. At night, when desert temperatures plunged to 60 degrees, the earth released its stored warmth gradually, maintaining interior stability. The result was a living space that remained between 68 and 74 degrees year-round, with minimal heating or cooling effort, a temperature range Heinrich could document with the German thermometer he'd brought from Hamburg. The mathematics were precise and verifiable. Earth at a depth of 8 feet maintains a nearly constant temperature year-round, typically within 5 degrees of the annual average air temperature for that location. Silver City's annual average temperature was approximately 63 degrees. Heinrich's dwelling, with its earth coverage averaging 10 feet deep, tapped into this thermal stability automatically. The temperature differential between the stable earth temperature and the desired interior comfort range of 70 degrees was just 7 degrees, requiring minimal energy input to maintain. By contrast, Patterson's timber house fought temperature differentials of 45 degrees in summer and 50 degrees in winter, requiring constant energy expenditure to overcome the massive thermal gradient. The ancestral Puebloans, who'd built cliff dwellings at Bandelier and Mesa Verde between 1150 and 1300 AD, understood this principle instinctively. They'd constructed entire communities into canyon walls and beneath rock overhangs, creating structures where thermal mass regulation was automatic. The thick adobe walls and earth-covered roofs maintained comfortable temperatures through summer heat that exceeded 100 degrees and winter cold that dropped below zero. Korean architects had developed ondol floor heating systems that used Earth's thermal mass as early as 1000 BC. Scandinavian turf houses, common in Iceland and Norway through the 1800s, employed similar principles, banking earth against walls and covering roofs with sod to create insulation that timber alone couldn't match. But New Mexico ranchers in 1891 built with timber frames and thin walls, structures that leaked heat in winter and turned into ovens in summer, requiring constant fuel for heating and offering no relief from summer's punishment. Heinrich had calculated the thermal performance before breaking ground. A conventional timber frame house with 1-inch pine walls provided an R value of approximately 1.25, meaning it took 1.25 hours for 1 BTU of heat to transfer through 1 square foot of wall. Heinrich's earth-sheltered design with 3 feet of earth on the roof and packed earth walls provided an effective R value of approximately 18. The difference wasn't trivial. Patterson's timber house, with roughly 1,200 square feet of exterior wall and roof surface, lost heat at a rate of about 960 BTUs per degree Fahrenheit of temperature difference per hour. Heinrich's design, with only the southern facade exposed and thick earth insulation elsewhere, lost perhaps 200 BTUs per degree per hour. In winter, when the temperature difference between inside and outside averaged 40 degrees, Patterson's house bled 38,400 BTUs hourly. Heinrich's bled 8,000. To maintain comfortable temperature, Patterson burned approximately 1.5 cords of firewood monthly through winter. Heinrich burned 1/4 cord, and his home stayed warmer. The construction process had been exacting. Heinrich excavated the initial cavity over 6 weeks, removing approximately 180 cubic yards of soil, roughly 243 tons of material moved by shovel and wheelbarrow. He'd installed the timber framework using 16-inch ponderosa pine beams spaced 2 feet apart, then covered the framework with a layer of 1-inch pine planking. Over the planking, he'd spread a waterproof membrane made from canvas soaked in pine tar and beeswax, a technique borrowed from ship construction. The membrane extended beyond the roof edges and angled downward to channel any moisture away from the structure. Above the membrane, he'd packed the excavated soil in 8-inch layers, each layer tamped firm before adding the next, eventually creating the full roof depth of 8 to 12 feet. The ventilation pipes, carefully angled and capped with covers that allowed air exchange while blocking rain, created natural convection that pulled fresh air through the living space continuously. Critics called it wasteful. Morrison calculated Heinrich had used 2,400 board feet of lumber in the underground framework, enough to build a conventional house with walls, roof, and floor. "You've buried a fortune in timber where no one will ever see it," Morrison said. "That's not thrift, that's foolishness." But Heinrich had read the archaeological reports from Chaco Canyon, where Puebloan structures built in them thousands still stood. Their earth and stone construction outlasting Spanish missions, built with conventional methods. He'd studied the thermodynamics in German engineering journals. He knew what he'd built would last and would perform. The skeptics knew what frontier experience had taught them: timber construction that could be completed quickly and repaired easily. Both sides had logic. Both sides had evidence. The question wouldn't be settled by debate. It would be settled by the driest summer in New Mexico Territory history, and by fire. The winter of 1891-92 passed with below-average snowfall. Silver City received just 8 inches of snow total, compared to a normal 23 inches. Spring 1892 brought minimal rain, just 2 inches in March and April combined. By May, the grasslands had turned brown early, and ranchers watched their water sources shrink. June delivered 1/10 of an inch of rain. July was bone dry. The high desert, normally arid, became a tinderbox. Patterson's ranch hands found 3 small grass fires in June alone, started by lightning strikes, each one stamped out before spreading far. Morrison remarked at the general store in early July that he'd never seen the timber so dry. "You can snap pine branches with one hand," he said. "Everything's ready to burn." August arrived with temperatures pushing 110 degrees and not a cloud visible. The Gila National Forest, which surrounded Silver City to the north and west, consisted of thousands of acres of ponderosa pine, juniper, and piñón, all of it starved for moisture. August 17, 1892, a lightning storm passed through the mountains north of Silver City without dropping rain. Multiple strikes hit the forest. By noon on August 18th, smoke was visible on the northern horizon. By evening, the wind had shifted, blowing from the north at 15 to 20 miles per hour, pushing the fire directly toward the settlement. The Gila Fire, as it would be known in territorial records, consumed 47,000 acres in 3 days, the largest wildfire in New Mexico Territory history to that date. The fire moved fast, driven by wind through drought-killed vegetation. Silver City residents could see the glow on the night horizon of August 18th. By dawn on August 19th, ash was falling in the streets. Samuel Patterson made the decision that morning to evacuate his family. His ranch house sat 4 miles northwest of town, directly in the fire's path. He loaded his wife, 3 children, and whatever belongings could fit in 2 wagons, and headed for Silver City's center, where stone buildings offered some protection. "The house is gone," he told Jack Morrison. "No way to save it. That fire's moving 6 miles a day." Morrison's own property sat 3 miles west. He evacuated as well, watching the smoke wall advance. By afternoon of August 19th, the fire had reached the outlying properties. Patterson's ranch house, built of pine timber with a cedar shake roof, caught fire from wind-blown embers at approximately 3 p.m. The structure was fully engulfed within 20 minutes. The barn followed. The fire consumed everything combustible, leaving only stone chimney foundations and the iron stove. Patterson, watching from town through field glasses, saw his home reduced to ash in less than an hour. Morrison's house burned that evening, along with his workshop and lumber storage. Garrett's sawmill, located near a creek 2 miles west of town, burned despite the proximity to water. The heat was so intense it ignited timber stored 50 yards from the actual flames. 17 homes and outbuildings burned on August 19th and 20th. Father Santos's small wooden church, built in 1885, burned to its stone foundation. Families crowded into the town's stone buildings, the courthouse, the bank, 2 mercantile stores with brick construction. The air was thick with smoke, visibility reduced to a few hundred yards. The sun, a dim orange disk behind the haze. The human cost extended beyond property. Daniel McCormick, a 67-year-old rancher with respiratory problems, suffered severe breathing difficulties from smoke inhalation while evacuating his property. He collapsed August 19th and spent 3 days in critical condition at the makeshift medical station Dr. Robert Hayes established in the courthouse basement. McCormick survived but never fully recovered his lung capacity. Elizabeth Morrison, Jack's 71-year-old mother who lived in a small cabin adjacent to his workshop, refused to evacuate initially, insisting she'd weathered worse storms. Jack forcibly removed her from the property at 4 p.m. on August 19th, less than 2 hours before flames consumed her cabin. She lost everything except the clothes she wore and a photograph album Jack grabbed on his way out. The psychological toll on elderly residents who'd spent decades building their homesteads, only to watch them vanish in minutes, created trauma that lasted years. Margaret Patterson later wrote to her sister in St. Louis describing nightmares where she smelled smoke and woke in panic, convinced her new home was burning. Heinrich's property sat on Pinos Altos Ridge, elevated above much of the surrounding land but still in the fire's projected path. The flames reached his property line on the evening of August 19th. Anna Muller, holding 6-year-old Greta, watched through the southern windows as fire consumed the grassland approaching their home. Klaus, age 9, asked his father if they should evacuate. Heinrich checked his thermometer, noted the interior temperature at 71 degrees despite the inferno outside, and made a calculated decision. "We stay," he said. "The earth protects us." The fire swept past the property through the night. Flames engulfed the small wooden storage shed Heinrich had built for tools. The shed vanished. Fire consumed the wooden fence posts around the property. The posts burned to char. But the hillside structure, with 8 to 12 feet of earth above it and earth walls on 3 sides, presented nothing for the fire to consume except the southern facade's wooden door and window frames. The door caught fire from radiant heat at approximately 9 p.m. Heinrich soaked wool blankets in the water barrel he kept inside and hung them over the door and windows. The blankets steamed and smoked but didn't ignite. The interior temperature, measured at the center of the main room, climbed from 71 degrees to 84 degrees over 6 hours as heat radiated through the stone facade and the earth absorbed thermal energy from the firestorm outside. Heinrich monitored the temperature hourly, recording each reading in his journal. 9 p.m., 73 degrees. 10 p.m., 76 degrees. 11 p.m., 79 degrees. Midnight, 81 degrees. 1 a.m., 83 degrees. 2 a.m., 84 degrees. 3 a.m., 84 degrees, the temperature plateauing as the fire passed and the thermal mass reached equilibrium. By comparison, Patterson's family, crowded into the courthouse with dozens of other evacuees, endured indoor temperatures reaching 97 degrees from body heat and inadequate ventilation. Children cried from the heat and fear. Adults fanned themselves with whatever materials were available and prayed the stone walls would hold. But the thermal mass that made the structure comfortable in summer and winter also made it nearly impervious to rapid temperature change. The 42,000 pounds of earth surrounding the dwelling couldn't heat quickly, even with flames on the surface. While surface temperatures outside exceeded 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit where timber burned, the interior of Heinrich's home never exceeded 84 degrees. Anna later told Margaret Patterson, "I could hear the fire, like wind through trees. But inside we could breathe. It was hot, like summer afternoon, but we were safe." By dawn on August 20th, the fire had passed Heinrich's property. The grass was burned black. The storage shed was gone. But the hillside structure stood intact. The wooden door was charred but hadn't burned through. The window frames showed scorch marks but remained in place. Heinrich had lost some tools, some fencing, and nothing else. 200 yards downslope, Thomas Garrett's conventional timber house was a foundation and a chimney. The contrast wasn't subtle. Before we dig into exactly how this transformed the community's understanding of construction, hit that like button if you're finding this valuable, and drop a comment below telling me whether you'd live in an earth-sheltered home. Your engagement helps this channel grow. August 21st, Samuel Patterson rode up to Heinrich's property on a borrowed horse, his own livestock scattered or dead. Patterson had lost his house, his barn, most of his tools, and was sleeping on the floor of the courthouse with 40 other displaced families. He found Heinrich outside, clearing burned debris from around the property. Patterson dismounted and stood silent for a full minute, looking at the charred hillside, the intact door, the smoke still rising from the storage shed's remains. "Your place stood," Patterson finally said. It wasn't a question. Heinrich nodded. "The earth doesn't burn." Patterson walked closer to the southern facade, examining the stone wall, the scorched but intact window frames. "What's the temperature inside?" Heinrich retrieved his thermometer from inside the dwelling and showed Patterson. 76 degrees, already cooling from the previous night's high. Patterson looked at the instrument, then at Heinrich. "My family spent last night in a room with 60 people. Had to be 95 degrees in there, maybe more. Kids couldn't sleep." He paused. "I was wrong. This works." Jack Morrison visited that afternoon with similar purpose. Morrison had built houses for 20 years, taken pride in his craft, his square corners and tight joints. He'd lost not just his home, but his professional credibility. His houses had burned while the structure he'd called foolish stood untouched. Morrison examined the timber framework visible at the entrance, the earth-packed walls, the ventilation pipes. "Show me how you built the roof," he said. Heinrich walked him through the entire design. The timber framework, the planking, the waterproof membrane, the layered earth compaction. Morrison took notes in a small leather journal, sketching details. "The membrane's the key to moisture protection," Heinrich explained. "Without that, yes, the timber would rot. With it, the timber stays dry indefinitely." Morrison nodded slowly. "I called you wasteful, but you're not burying timber to hide it. You're preserving it where weather can't reach it." He looked at Heinrich directly. "I need to rebuild my house and workshop. Would you share the specifications?" Over the following week, 17 families visited Heinrich's property. Father Santos came, examined the structure, measured the interior temperature against the outside heat, and declared it a marvel of practical engineering blessed by Providence. Margaret Patterson, who'd called the dwelling a cellar, apologized to Anna. "I spoke from ignorance. You're living more comfortably than anyone in town right now." The requests for information became a flood. Heinrich spent days drawing plans, explaining the excavation process, the timber framework, the waterproofing technique, the ventilation system. He shared everything freely, never asking payment, never gloating about vindication. "The Puebloans understood this 700 years ago," he told visitors. "I just borrowed their wisdom." But he added critical engineering improvements the ancient builders hadn't possessed: the waterproof membrane, the calculated ventilation, the thermometer-verified temperature control. By September 1892, the territorial government had surveyed the fire damage and documented the losses. 43 structures completely destroyed, including homes, barns, churches, and commercial buildings. Estimated economic damage exceeded $180,000, equivalent to roughly $5.4 million today. 173 families displaced. Livestock losses topped 400 cattle and horses. And one earth-sheltered dwelling, scorched but intact, occupied by one family who never evacuated. The territorial surveyor, James Whitmore, visited Heinrich's property specifically to document the anomaly. Whitmore measured the scorch depth on the wooden door. 2 inches of char on 4-inch timber, meaning the door would have burned through in perhaps another hour of direct flame exposure. He examined the earth coverage, the ventilation system, the interior temperature. His official report stated, "The earth-sheltered design demonstrates remarkable fire resistance. Recommend consideration for future construction in fire-prone regions." Samuel Patterson became the first to rebuild using Heinrich's design. Patterson owned a large parcel northeast of town, far enough from the burned area to have intact topsoil. He hired Heinrich as a consultant and broke ground in October 1892 on an earth-sheltered ranch house measuring 30 feet by 40 feet, larger than Heinrich's original. Patterson modified the design to include a western facade as well as the southern exposure, creating more natural light while maintaining the earth protection on north, east, and roof. The excavation took 8 weeks with 4 men working. The timber framework required 3,200 board feet of lumber, expensive but justified by the performance. Patterson calculated his lumber cost at $96, compared to perhaps $75 for a conventional house. but the fuel savings would recover the difference in 2 winters. His family moved in February 1893. Margaret Patterson reported to the sewing circle that her new home maintained 68 degrees through a January cold snap that hit 12 degrees outside. "We burned 1/4 the firewood Samuel used at the old ranch house," she said, "and were warmer." Jack Morrison rebuilt his home and workshop using a hybrid design. He constructed a conventional timber frame workshop above ground for easy access to tools and materials, then built an earth-sheltered living quarters into a nearby slope for fire protection and thermal efficiency. Morrison's hybrid approach became popular with craftsmen and merchants who needed above-ground workspace but wanted safe, efficient homes. By summer 1893, 11 families had built earth-sheltered dwellings in the Silver City area. By 1895, the number reached 27. The designs varied. Some, like Patterson's, featured 2 facades for more light. Others incorporated the earth shelter into barn designs, protecting livestock and feed from both fire and temperature extremes. Heinrich's original design became the template, but the community innovated constantly. Father Santos oversaw construction of a new church in 1894, incorporating earth-sheltered design into the sacristy and priests' quarters while maintaining a traditional above-ground sanctuary. "God's word should be spoken in the light," Santos said, "but those who serve can live wisely." The hybrid church design reduced heating costs dramatically, allowing the parish to redirect funds to charity. Thomas Garrett rebuilt his sawmill with an earth-sheltered storage area for dried lumber, protecting his inventory from both fire and weather-related damage. Garrett calculated that moisture damage had cost him approximately $400 annually in unsellable timber. The earth-sheltered storage eliminated the problem entirely while also reducing fire insurance costs by 60%. The fuel savings proved quantifiable and dramatic. Heinrich tracked his firewood consumption through 5 winters and documented an average of 2.3 cords per season, compared to the 8 to 12 cords typical for conventional timber homes of similar size. At $4 per cord delivered, Heinrich saved between $23 and $30 annually on heating fuel alone, recovering his additional construction cost in under 5 years. Patterson, with his larger home, burned 3.1 cords per winter versus an estimated 14 cords for comparable conventional construction, saving approximately $44 annually. The economic argument became irrefutable. Initial construction cost averaged 15 to 25% higher due to excavation labor and waterproofing materials, but operational costs ran 40 to 60% lower indefinitely. The structures also proved more durable, with no exterior wall painting required, no roof shake replacement every 7 to 10 years, minimal weather-related maintenance. A territorial architect, William Bradford from Santa Fe, visited Silver City in 1894 to study the earth-sheltered construction trend. Bradford measured temperatures, surveyed residents, examined multiple structures, and published his findings in the Santa Fe, New Mexican newspaper. "The earth-sheltered design represents a superior adaptation to southwestern climate," Bradford wrote. "By combining ancient Puebloan principles with modern engineering, settlers have created housing that outperforms conventional timber construction in fire resistance, thermal efficiency, durability, and long-term economy. This is frontier innovation at its finest." Bradford's article brought regional attention. Architects from Albuquerque and Tucson traveled to Silver City to examine the structures. Heinrich hosted a 3-day workshop in June 1895, teaching 43 builders and homesteaders the excavation, waterproofing, and ventilation techniques. He charged nothing for the instruction. "Knowledge shared grows stronger," he said. By 1900, earth-sheltered construction had spread across southwestern New Mexico and southeastern Arizona. A survey conducted by the territorial government identified 127 earth-sheltered or partially earth-sheltered dwellings in Grant, Luna, and Hidalgo counties. The technique had moved beyond experimental. It had become a recognized regional building tradition, adapted to local conditions and refined through practice. Second-generation builders innovated further. Some incorporated thicker stone facades with thermal mass calculations. Others experimented with different waterproofing compounds, mixing coal tar, lime, and natural oils to create durable membranes. A rancher named Joseph Chen, who'd immigrated from China, combined earth sheltering with principles from Chinese cave dwellings, creating a design with superior ventilation through calculated cross-breeze channels. Heinrich Müller died peacefully in his earth-sheltered home on March 3, 1919, at the age of 71. Anna lived in the structure until her own death in 1924. Klaus Müller, Heinrich's son, maintained the property and raised his own family there. The original 1891 structure stood continuously occupied until 1957, when Klaus's widow moved to live with family in Albuquerque. The dwelling sat empty for decades but remained structurally sound, the earth protection preventing the rapid decay typical of abandoned wooden structures. In 1983, the Grant County Historical Society acquired the property and restored the southern facade, replacing deteriorated timber while preserving Heinrich's original design. The structure became a registered historical site in 1987. Today, visitors can tour Heinrich Müller's earth-sheltered home, see the original ventilation pipes, measure the interior temperature stability, and understand what frontier innovation looked like when ancient wisdom met German engineering. Modern research has vindicated every principle Heinrich applied. The Passive House Institute, founded in Germany in 1996, promotes energy-efficient construction using thermal mass, superior insulation, and controlled ventilation, the identical principles Heinrich employed in 1891. Earth-sheltered housing gained renewed interest during the 1970s energy crisis, when architects revisited traditional techniques that reduced heating and cooling costs. The Malcolm Wells School of Earth-Sheltered Architecture, popular in the 1970s and 80s, produced designs remarkably similar to Heinrich's New Mexico prototype, proving the principles transcend time and location. Contemporary earth-sheltered homes in New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada demonstrate annual heating and cooling cost savings of 50 to 70% compared to conventional construction, precisely the advantage Heinrich documented 130 years ago. Fire resistance remains critically relevant. The 2011 Las Conchas fire burned 156,000 acres in northern New Mexico. The 2012 Whitewater Baldy Complex fire consumed 297,000 acres in the Gila Wilderness near Silver City. Modern earth-sheltered homes in these fire zones survived intact while conventional structures burned, repeating the pattern from 1892. The U.S. Forest Service now recommends earth sheltering as one of several fire-resistant construction techniques for wildfire-prone regions, acknowledging what Heinrich proved through lived experience. The contemporary movement toward sustainable, resilient housing increasingly incorporates earth sheltering, recognizing that the most innovative solutions often come from the oldest traditions, refined by modern engineering. The tragedy is how close this knowledge came to being lost entirely. If the Gila fire had struck 5 years earlier, before Heinrich built his demonstration, or if it had burned a different path that missed his property, the community would have dismissed earth sheltering as impractical cave dwelling with no empirical validation. Heinrich's contribution wasn't inventing a technique, the Puebloans had perfected it centuries before. His contribution was translating ancient wisdom into frontier context, documenting the performance scientifically and sharing the knowledge generously so it could spread and evolve. That combination of cultural humility, technical competence, and community spirit is what transforms individual innovation into lasting legacy. The lesson extends beyond construction. How many other traditional techniques have we dismissed as primitive or outdated without testing them against modern challenges? How many immigrants and indigenous people possess knowledge that mainstream culture ignores until crisis forces recognition? Heinrich's story teaches that expertise comes in many forms, that ancient doesn't mean inferior, and that the strongest innovations often emerge when we combine traditional wisdom with contemporary tools and humble ourselves enough to learn from those we initially dismiss. Samuel Patterson, Jack Morrison, and Father Santos weren't fools for their skepticism. They were experienced professionals working from established knowledge. But they were wise enough to acknowledge error when empirical evidence contradicted their assumptions, and courageous enough to adopt better methods, even when doing so meant admitting they'd been wrong. The earth-sheltered home on Pinos Altos Ridge stands today as a monument to that wisdom, to the power of observation over assumption, to the value of traditional knowledge, and to the principle that the best defense against disaster is often the simplest solution, well executed. Give this video a like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what other historical building techniques you want me to investigate. Next time, we're diving into the story of a Norwegian immigrant in North Dakota who invented a dual-wall construction method that kept his family alive through the blizzard of 1888, while his neighbors froze to death in conventional timber houses. You won't want to miss it.